Hi everyone, welcome back. So we are here for the next session, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Tina Amini, the Medical Device Division Director for NDA Group. She's going to be discussing the compliance outlook after COVID-19. So sit back, relax, enjoy the session, and Tina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Becky, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tina Amini. And today I will be sharing with you information on the new EU legal framework, the reason for the change, transitional timelines, key changes, challenges for medtech and biotech or pharma industries, current status post-pandemic, and some tips on what to do to become compliant. EU legal framework has changed. Two new regulations have replaced the current directives. Medical Device Directive and Active Implantable Medical Device Directive are replaced by Medical Device Regulation and In Vitro Diagnostic Directive with IVD Regulation. The reason for the change was primarily to improve patient safety. The new regulations further aim to create a transparent and sustainable regulatory framework, bringing EU legislation in line with technical advances. Regulations also create fair market access for manufacturers because in contrast to directives, regulations are directly applicable and do not need to be imposed into national law. The regulation will therefore reduce the risk of discrepancies in interpretation across the EU market. The new regulations came into force in May 2017. However, to allow manufacturers and others in the supply chain, especially SMEs, notified bodies, member states, and the Commission, to adopt the changes introduced by these regulations and to ensure their proper application, initially, a 3-year transitional period for MDR and a 5-year transition period for IVDR was allowed. That meant that MDR was to become fully applicable on 26th of May 2020 and IVDR on 26th of May 2022. Then came the COVID-19 pandemic, and as a result, the application date of the MDR was postponed by 1 year. The intention was to ease the pressure on notified bodies, competent authorities, and the medical device industry, and allow them to fully concentrate on urgent priorities related to the pandemic crisis. That means that MDR new date of application is now 26th of May 2021, which is only a few months away. Unfortunately, today, there is no word yet if IVDR date of application will be postponed, despite industry raising concerns on numerous occasions. The new regulations have brought significant changes, with IVD industry getting the biggest shakeup. These changes are causing much concerns in Europe's market, with timelines putting pressure on many companies. So let's see what the key changes are at the top level. Both regulations have wider scopes. MDR brought certain devices not covered by directive within its scopes. For example, devices without medical intention or intended use, such as laser devices for aesthetic applications, colored contact lenses. The expanded scope of IVDR will now cover diagnostic, including internet-based services, genetic testing, and other tests that provide information about a patient's predisposition to a specific disease or susceptibility for a medical treatment. MDR has introduced new classification rules, resulting in an up-classification of several devices. One major change is on software, which are now put into higher risk category devices. Not all of them, but most of them. IVDR has also introduced a new risk-based classification. On the current IVD directive, most of IVDs can be self-declared and do not need third-party assessment. However, on the IVDR, about 80 to 90% of IVDs now need to be certified by notified bodies before they can be placed on the market. This will be a big challenge for the IVD manufacturers who now need to have their quality system assessed by a notified body and the technical documentations. Needless to say that both regulations are putting pressure on notified bodies as well. Increased transparencies and traceabilities are introduced by introduction of the unique device identification, a new central database called UDMED. There are going to be more rigorous requirements for the clinical evidence, post-market and vigilance, and there are more governance and oversights with regards to both manufacturers and notified bodies, and many more and additional requirements are coming with these new regulations. This slide captures the medical device life cycle. Both regulations are basically applying a life cycle approach. As you can see, for a medical device under MDR, the process starts with the concept, research and development. The next step is basically when the device is practically to be designed, is the device classification, as it impacts the evidence or documentation required, as well as the conformity assessment procedures. You can see that except for Class 1 medical devices, the involvement of the third-party assessment bodies, notified bodies, are required before devices can get CE mark and placed on the market. Under regulations, there are now more scrutiny for devices pre-market, particularly high-risk devices. When conformity assessment are completed successfully, then the notified body issues certificate, which allows the manufacturer to affix CE mark on the devices, and then sign the declaration of conformity and place the devices on the market. And remember that the responsibilities of manufacturers are not finished at this point. They need to actively collect information on the safety and performance of their devices in real world. Under new regulations, manufacturers are expected to prepare periodic safety update reports for high-risk devices, and these need to be assessed by notified bodies as well. And now let's look at the challenges. First of all, the clock is ticking. So you can see that the new regulations require a good understanding of the requirements. It requires more skilled resources to address all of these requirements. It's putting emphasis more and more on clinical evidence, and manufacturers are expected to generate clinical data on their own devices. They need to update processes to show compliance, ensure that they are looking at the life cycle of the devices. Then it brings with it the cost of the compliance, additional time, and then one of the main bottlenecks, which is the notified bodies. As we heard that most of the devices, whether being medical devices or in vitro diagnostics, are required involvement of these notified bodies and their assessment. And worthy of note that the new medical device regulation not only affects medical devices and the medtech industry, but also impacts the integral combination products, which are regulated under medicinal product as well. A short article in medical device regulation with a huge impact is Article 117 or Article 117. The new regulation amends Directive 2001/83/EC, and in brief, it requires the device aspect of integral drug-device combination products to be assessed by notified bodies unless the device is Class 1 non-sterile or non-measuring or already CE marked. So how this has changed the process? On the current process, the pharma or biotech that is developing or is trying to submit an application, a marketing authorization application to medicine agency or European Medicine Agency, just put everything together, includes the information on the device aspect, and make the submission and application. On the new regulation, the pharma and biotech needs to find and interact with notified body, obtain an assessment report on the device aspect from them, include this assessment report within their marketing authorization application, and then make the submission and apply to medicine agency or European medicine agencies. And of course, this is causing some challenges. First of all, identifying and working with a designated notified body could be a new experience for the biotech or pharma industries. The information of how exactly to present data, and worst of all is there is no set timeline for obtaining this notified body report. And finally, they need to include this report into the marketing authorization dossier And that's going to affect their timelines for the submission because they have to wait for this assessment report. And finally, in case of changes to device, they need to start the whole process again and go back to notified body and get those changes assessed by the notified body. And when we're talking about the changes, there are changes specifically to device, and then include that one in their variation before submitting to the authorities. Until now, I shared with you some of the key changes and challenges that regulation brings along. Now I'd like to tell you about some of the bottlenecks and hurdles. I'm sure by now you noticed that the regulation do not just affect manufacturers and those in supply chain, but they also impact the notified bodies themselves. In case you are not familiar with notified bodies, they are private and independent conformity assessment bodies designated by authorities, and they conduct routine assessment of the quality management system and technical documentation. They cannot provide consultancy, and finally, you should know that the assessment process timeline and the fees vary between notified bodies. Notified bodies themselves need to be designated under the new regulation, and this is one of the biggest bottlenecks. The slow designation process has caused concerns among the medtech industry. If we compare the number of notified bodies designated against directive to the ones designated under regulation, you can clearly see one big concern. There are insufficient number of notified body designated as yet, and unfortunately, their capacities are not known either. As of 1st of February, there are only 18 notified bodies designated under MDR and 4 under IVDR. However, if you look at the numbers against the directives, excluding the ones that are from Turkey, there were 49 designated notified bodies under directives, MDD and AIMDD, and 21 for in vitro diagnostics. And add to this the additional workload that's notified bodies need to do, and that it becomes clear that notified bodies can be a bottleneck. And one of the workloads is not just about the new devices that are going to be certified under MDR or IVDR. Of course, notified bodies are supposed to look at the periodic safety audit reports that are required on an annual basis for Class 2B and Class 3 legacy devices, as well as the MDR or IVDR basically certified devices as well. So that's going to increase their workload tremendously. In addition to insufficient number of notified bodies, and with less than 4 months to go to the date of application, the full application of MDR, let's see if everything that the regulation needs is ready and in place. New regulations require the establishment of scientific bodies, namely expert panels, expert laboratories, and EU reference laboratories. Their roles are to provide the European Commission, member states, notified bodies, and manufacturers with scientific and technical advice. They are to contribute to guidance and other relevant documents, and to identify emerging issues of concern regarding medical devices and IVDs. You should know that expert panels list was only made available a few weeks ago. Regulation also requires expert labs and EU reference labs to verify the performance claimed by the manufacturers to ensure a level of safety and performance. But unfortunately, no information on these have been published so far. For transparency and traceability, regulation requires several information or reports to be uploaded to a central database, UDOMED. However, only one module of this UDOMED has been made available. There are 5 more to come at a later date. Common specification is another area. Regulations refer to common specifications, which are a set of technical or clinical requirements other than standards that provides means of complying with the legal obligations. And to date, only one has been published, and we now know that their publication have been delayed to Q2 of 2021. And to make things more challenging comes the pandemic. While the disruption caused by the pandemic has pushed the MDR deadline back, it has also introduced fresh challenges. For example, the focus and priority of regulatory bodies have shifted. This can affect the notified body designation and preparation of the regulations infrastructure. Traveling restrictions and the requirements for social distancing have had major impacts on the sector. Until very recently, notified bodies were unable to do on-site initial assessment under regulations, so they couldn't certify devices under regulations. And even today, although this has been allowed under very strict circumstances, it has not been rolled out on a wide scale. The impact on the clinical investigations and data collections and planned post-market clinical follow-up studies cannot be overlooked either. The outbreak is affecting medtech companies in different ways. On one hand, it generated high demand for related products such as CT and ultrasounds, ventilators, IVD detection kits, and certain digital technologies. Unsurprisingly, manufacturers of these devices have seen high demands and turnover in 2020 and are anticipating a similar effect throughout in 2021 as well. On the other hand, there has been a sharp decline in elective medical procedures, and as a result, demand for interventional devices has contracted. And as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to unfold, medical device companies are finding it difficult to make informed decisions about their products and supply chain. Some also have seen budget cuts and reduced funding, putting the compliance with the new regulations at risk. So what to do now? MDR and IVDR timelines are approaching fast and you need to act quickly. Updated requirements need thorough review, proper planning, and enough time. The new regulation compliance projects will need to have cross-functional teams and governance, as this affects the complete product lifecycle requirements. Programs and project management becomes crucial. Leadership needs to be proactive in strategizing the program, planning for the budget and resources, and starting implementation. Change management, effective communication, and training will become critical as organizations will have to adapt to a great many challenges. And to sum up, a structured approach, the right planning and management, tailored training, sufficient skilled resources and budgets are needed. And maybe we can all hope for delay to date of applications of these regulations. Thank you for listening. And now back to you, Becky.
Thanks so much, Tina. I hope everyone enjoyed that as much as I did. I do encourage you to reach out to Tina, whether that be on the platform or, via LinkedIn or other mediums. But in the meantime, I will see you back here for our next session in an hour or so, where we'll be looking at how to create and scale a true quality culture at your medical device company. So in the meantime, I'll see you then.